Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the poem of the day for today, Monday, November the 10th, 2025. Today is a continuation or a companion piece or a sequel to yesterday's poem or yesterday's video, which was a reading of the poem The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. So if you've not seen that video, I recommend that you go back and watch that one first. I will be rereading parts of the poem today, but to get the whole thing uninterrupted, you should go back to that one. You can also look up, there's a recording of Eliot reading the poem. And while I'm a big fan of Eliot, I don't think he was a great reader of his own work. He has a very slow and dramatic affectation and really leans into some of the rhythm and the sonic qualities that he was having instead of letting them occur a little bit more naturally. I remember hearing it in high school, and there's this part where he's like, there will be time, there will be time. And it's just a little, I don't know, it's hard to focus on the words. There is another reading by Sir Anthony Hopkins, that, of course, is really, really good. I don't think that guy could perform anything not at the top of the ability of human performance. So I do recommend that one as well. That one certainly is a lot better than mine. So we're going to get into Prufrock from 1917. And one thing you should know off the bat, this is a work of modernism, so it's a work of stream of consciousness, which means that it's fragmented. It's going to feel as though it's rambling. It is not going to have a lot of the tight traditional genre structures like some other poems that we've talked about, sonnets, villanelles, sestinas, things like that. You're not going to see that in here. You will get some elements of rhyme, of course, especially rhyming couplets and some of the other poetic devices that we've discussed, but it is free verse, it's stream of consciousness, it's made up of fragments, allusions, interruptions, repetitions, all of those things that we come to know as characteristics of modernist poetry. One such allusion, especially to the past, to the great tradition of literature, comes at the very beginning of the poem, which is a reference to Dante's Inferno. And I'm not going to read it in the Italian because I'm just going to butcher it, but I will read the translation for you. So the epigraph reads this. If I but thought that my response were made to one perhaps returning to the world, this tongue of flame would cease to flicker. But since, up from these depths, no one has yet returned alive, if what I hear is true, I answer without fear of being shamed. So that's the setting. That's the opening kind of title card to the movie of the poem here. And so that in some ways kind of sits over the rest of the poem for us. Now, one of the things that I want to identify right at the beginning in the first 3 lines of the poem, which are these: let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. This is an interesting 3 lines to read because I always put a pause right after patient, just inevitably. There's not one in there, there's no comma, but the cadence of that second line leading right into the third and then ending with that hard T of patient always makes me just kind of pause, even though it should be like a patient etherized upon a table. I just kind of drop a comma in like a patient etherized upon a table. But what you can hear in there is the first 2 lines rhyme, I and sky, and then there's an internal rhyme in the third line, etherized. And right off the bat, we have a break of a rhyme into the middle of the line, but those 3 things I think characterize the speaker Prufrock of the poem Prufrock. I, right, it's inside one's head, it's focused on subjectivity. Sky, his head is up in the clouds, he is looking towards eternity, he is gazing towards spaces and times outside of himself. Everything is abstract and aloof. He's either horribly interior or searching for something that is kind of more transcendent. And then etherized, which means that you are drugged and numb to pain. And that's what he's trying to do by over intellectualizing everything and by withdrawing in a certain way, right? So I, head in the clouds, attempting to be numb or numb to feeling. And that's right off the bat. We then get the first of a series of these anaphoras, which is the beginning of lines in near proximity that are the same. Let us go then, you and I, and then line 4, let us go. So we have 2 commands of let's go. And that lets us know that the speaker is not necessarily addressing us as readers, although we do become a sort of secondary audience, but that the speaker is addressing someone. In this case, a beloved. I don't know if it's a beloved as much as it's a woman that he is fond of, that he wants to be able to speak to. And he's not really able to do that. And the rest of this stanza sets up the setting, right? The muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster sales. Streets that flow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. And so he's amidst this area, much like we read in an earlier Eliot poem. Oh my goodness, it's escaping my mind right now, and I should have prepared it a little bit better. It was let me see if I can just flick through here real quick and find it. Morning at the Window. That it's industrial London City. So everything here has layers of, decay or layers of kind of film textures to it, right? The sawdust and the winding of these streets that sort of echoes go down them, and they're personified as muttering themselves, leading up to a question. And then he says, "Do not ask, what is it?" And we get that third, "Let us go and make our visit." So we have this question that he's not able to put into words just yet, but seems as though everything, even these streets that are winding like tedious arguments, like exchanges of words that ultimately go nowhere and are endless and boring, they also lead to this one question that seems to bear all of this importance for him. Then we get this 2-line rhyme. It's a little couplet, its own stanza in here. "In the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo." This will appear again on the next page. And it also sets the scene of being kind of in a high society social gathering where people are just kind of wandering in, sifting in, sifting out, wandering back out, just kind of dwelling or pacing. And they're talking about Michelangelo, so they're trying to talk about something historical, higher art, but there's not a whole lot of passion or knowledge or importance placed in it. So there's this empty kind of pretension to the society that he's hanging out with. And this is then contrasted with what we see again going on the outside, which is this yellow fog and yellow smoke, which is personified as rubbing its back on the windows, rubbing its muzzles on the windows, licking its tongue on the corners of the evening, slipping by the terrace, and then finally curling in a house and falling asleep. So it's something that pervades everything around them, especially kind of the barriers that set up a house. It gets through because it's ethereal, and it has this essence to it that's not necessarily material and concrete, but it's being described here as almost like a cat, right? That's finding its comfort and finding its becoming cozy, but it's invasive inside these human spaces because these places are kind of filled with neglect, and there's this nastiness, or there's almost this kind of contamination that's seeping in as a part of this modern world. And so the setting of this modern world that has these long streets and this dust and the smog in it is something that is also going to lead to the disillusionment and the alienation of the speaker. So we go to what's in my version, the next page. We then get again another one of those anaphras setting up the next 2 stanzas that has the refrain in the middle of "In the room the women come and go." And it's "And indeed there will be time." So as a young man, he's thinking about, I have all of this time ahead of me. I don't have to act right now and talk to this woman and shoot my shot, so to speak, because there will be time. And he repeats it again 4 lines down. "There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet." Now, what's interesting about that, the repetition of "there will be time within the line takes up time. That's what a repetition does, is it emphasizes, but it also says the same thing. It's the same utterance twice, and nothing is really added to it on the level of content or on the level of substance. It's an emphasis for him, serving almost as a mantra of reassurance. "Oh, there will be time later." But in doing that, you're further delaying it, and you're subtracting the actual opportunity for you to take this action or to make this speech. And So he says that there's time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. And this line has always reminded me of Closing Time by the Semisonics. Time for you to go out to the places you will be from, right? And that you go out and you meet all of these people, but that he's having to prepare a face to meet the faces that he meets. So it's also about kind of putting on a mask or putting on some sort of identity about how you want to be seen and recognized and understood by others. You can't let them into the intimacy of your own neurotic and obsessive thoughts that the speaker here has, his own anxiety, his own guilt, embarrassment, kind of emasculation, his own lust, even in certain places, but instead composing this person who is interesting and is not flawed and is not broken, which of course is the more interesting person, right? Is the person that's on the inside. After that, we get there's time to murder and create. And those are, it's kind of hyperbolic, right? He's not going to do either of these things, but it's the two extremes of life, that there's so much of life that's still left and you don't know what's in there. A little bit later, we get another repetition of time for you and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions and 100 visions and revisions before the taking of toast and tea. And that's really nice. That taking of toast and tea has that nice alliteration right at the end of it. But then we get, again, that kind of winding or slithering rhyme, which goes indecisions and revisions at the end with visions in the middle. But time for 100 indecisions, so 100 times in which you are unable to come to action to make up your mind. And then it says visions and revisions, so to be able to see something and then to re-see it again. And so this is somebody who's going to mull things over constantly on hundreds of different subjects and not ever really need to make up one's mind, because there's no sense of urgency of having to do it. There's a sense of the addictive nature of wasting time away by ruminating, but no impetus to action in this case. Now, after the next refrain of the Michelangelo, sorry, brief tangent here. Today was a Monday, and Mondays kind of aren't great, but I got to drink some coffee and read some T.S. Eliot, and I mean that's a happy man right there, We got to just take the small things where we can get them, right? Anyway, so we get the next, indeed, there will be time to wonder, do I dare, do I dare? So this question is starting to emerge. That question that was in the first one, that do not ask what is it, let us go make our visit. Well, it's the do I dare. Do you dare do what? And we'll get an answer to this in just a little bit. But this is the second kind of movement of the poem, even though Eliot doesn't mark it that way, because now he talks about turning back and descending, going away. So I've shown a little bit of myself, a little bit of that question, and now I'm retreating or descending. And he says, with a bald spot in my hair. And we get a parenthetical. They will say how his hair is growing thin, and a little bit later, but they will say how his arms and legs are thin. We can think back to that face to meet the faces that you meet. There's a strong sense of vanity in here as he's anticipating and really kind of dreading. There's a sense of anxiety in this about middle age, where you start to lose your muscle mass, you start to lose the density and the volume of your hair, or so he thinks about it, right? But also there's a vanity because he's imagining that people are going to be gossiping about him behind his back, right? And that's a really strong insecurity that he's having there. So even though in the previous larger stanza up, you get to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet, you're still not always going to be accepted on those terms that you want to be accepted on. People will see what they want, and we always imagine that they're really fixated on our imperfections or our qualities about ourselves that we find undesirable or that we find ugly. And then the question comes out. Do I dare disturb the universe? And this is broken up onto two lines. Do I dare? And then disturb the universe. That's the next revelation. We get to the question, and that's the end of the question. And this question is so amazing because it's at once so feckless and so grandiose. Disturb the universe, right? Like to do something that could shake and so reverberate throughout the expanses of all of the space that we know exists. And yet you're talking about just talking to one girl at a party that you kind of fancy or have a crush on. This is, I think, the question that the modern person has, which is, we have these tiny things in our day-to-day life that consume so much of us, that fascinate us and that obsess us, and they become life or death situations to us. And we think that it's going to be some decision, especially when you're younger, that's going to reverberate throughout the rest of your life. And you can't even see the extenses of the consequences that this thing is going to have. But when you're doing that, you're thinking of yourself as much largely more significant than you really are, right? Most people aren't really looking at you and thinking about your thinning hair or your thin legs and your thin arms and whatnot. And if you ask somebody out, if you shoot your shot and you get rejected, and then you take the rejection in kind, people move on. But again, to him, it's about disturbing the universe. So this question also becomes the occasion of really thinking about the passing of time and growing old and existential questions like your significance within the world and whether you can affect anything at all. Because then we get a repetition again there of, in a minute there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. That's a line that we had earlier about the decisions and revisions, but now he says in a minute there's time for it. So he's getting a sense of how fleeting and how impermanent even instances are, that within a single 60 seconds, there's another time that kind of opens up almost above it or outside of it. Instead of in duration chronologically, something opens up, right? That you can sit there and relive whole parts of your life and try to rewrite them or try to redirect them within an instant. And then he begins thinking about how he spends his time. For I have known them all already, known them all. We don't really know what the thems are. Later it suggests it's perhaps referring to other women. He talks about the evenings, mornings, afternoons. So this is day to day. I've known everything. I've seen it all. It's the same people. It's the same morning. It's the same afternoon. I've measured out my life with coffee spoons. So for him, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything is boring. And I love this line about measured out my life in coffee spoons, as though you line them all up. And by looking at them, it's like counting rings on a tree. You can tell how many days you've been alive just if you laid out all the spoons that you dunked your coffee, that you stirred your coffee with in the morning. We all have some way of doing this. I have a desk calendar, and I cross the days off, creating this chain that marks the time that I've been here. And with each one that I'm crossing through, in some ways it's an accomplishment. Okay, got all those things done. And another way I'm measuring out my life. And with each day that I cross out, there's one fewer day to cross out. I don't know how many days I have left, but there's a number. And when I wake up tomorrow, it will be one shorter. And however long this video goes, if you are with me for as long as it goes, you will be older at the end of this video than you are at this instant. And right now at this instant, you are the youngest you will ever be. And that's this paradox of time. It's this horrible truth of time that we all have to confront. But to measure one's life out in coffee spoons is to just be a witness or a passerby, a bystander in one's own life. And to think of how many people just do that. You know, Thursday's trash day, Thursday's trash day, Thursday's trash day. Moving on. We get the repetition again, the anaphora of, and I've known the eyes already, known them all. We're going to get that in the next stanza. I've known the arms already, known them all. Now we've moved eyes to arms. Eyes, I'm just kind of reading as, that place that if you can meet eyes with somebody, you see into their soul, it's said, right? That's where kind of we think the personality really dwells. You're going to read a lot about people in their eyes. And then arms makes me think back to him seeing like their arms growing thin, right? But you also might think of taking arms or linking arms with somebody that you love, that you want to escort them. We get another nice turn of alliteration here of the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I am formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, I always think of, it's almost like somebody taking like a needle and poking it in to like get a bug, right? And the bug is there and it's kind of kicking around impaled on the wall. Then how should I begin, right? I'm stuck by this outside force. I'm placed within a moment of time. And as much as I fight and as much as I try to move, I can't. And then he says, how should I begin to spit out all the buttons of my days and ways? And that reminds me of the cigarettes, right? Cigarettes and coffee. And you've got the coffee spoons laid out and then spitting out these buttons of your days. That's another thing. If you look at somebody who smokes and you look at their ashtray, that's another way of kind of measuring out your life in coffee spoons, is all of the, if you're a smoker, I'm not a smoker, but if you're a smoker, there's X amount of cigarettes left in your life that you're going to smoke. And with each other one, that's one fewer, right? So then moving down into the next stanza about the arms, then he talks about this woman or women. Is it a perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? And I think that's a really nice, to think about modernist literature, that's a Proustian reverie. to have a smell of something and then to be vaulted into the involuntary memory of something else, right? Whether it's a distraction or whether it's an internal monologue like this, or whether it's a memory of something from the past. And that's something that Proust is going to work with, ways in which chronological time can open themselves up to a different type of time, right? That minute wherein there's time for 100 decisions and indecisions, which a minute will reverse. Moving along, we have another ... there. And I think this is where the speaker begins to have a strong realization of his loss of time. One of my favorite lines is coming up here. He asks, should I say that I've gone through the narrow streets and that I've seen the smoke and the men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows? That reorients us, I think, to the beginning of the poem, where he's making these observations about the yellow smoke that goes upon the window panes and kind of wanders its way through and cozies up. This is that whole thing about like, do I dare to speak and let them know who I really am, or do I want to keep that face on at the beginning? And then we get a break at just 2 lines, like the Michelangelo one, that says, I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. And this is one of those lines that a student once said to me about a different line. I don't know what that means, but I know what it means. And I love that. I think that's a great way. Eliot says that poetry communicates before it's understood. And I think this is a line that does that. Now, having read this poem probably over a dozen times and still not knowing half of it, I think I know what that means, or one way it might mean. The claws, he says, it should have been the claws, not the lobster, not any sort of bug. I should have been the claws. And so it's detached, but it's still animate. I'm not a thing that's searching. I'm just the thing, the tool of the search, the attempt to grasp at something, but to grasp blindlessly, directionlessly, desperately in the dark for something, but not having any sort of organizing intellect about where to go with it, just grasping into the abyss, scuttling across the floors of silent seas, alone, unseen, unheard. And then also this image of just lobsters being hard on the outside, soft on the inside, this projection of all of his intellectualness and all of his theory about time and all of this that's going on, but ultimately to have within himself, thinking he's somebody who can disturb the universe, but having within himself not even really the courage or the gumption to crack this question that's going to reveal something very, very deep about himself. Skipping ahead just a little bit. He talked about having the strength to force a moment to its crisis, and that it would be, again, to speak at this point, because that crisis moment is the inflection moment upon which either a connection will be made or he'll be rejected. And then now again, we're getting, we get a biblical allusion. Though I have seen my head grown slightly bald, look, he's fixated on that again, grown bald, brought in upon a platter. I am no prophet, and here is no great matter. So we're starting to get these kind of paradoxes where he says, I've seen my head brought in on a platter, John the Baptist, but I'm no prophet and this is no great matter. I'm not a great person and this doesn't matter. I think of it that way. I think of myself as this kind of martyr for this, but I'm not. None of this matters to anybody else. And then here's the other recognition. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker. And in short, I was afraid. And so the image that we're given there is kind of like the flickering of a fire or the flickering of a candle. And right before it goes out, it has that last kind of, its peak expression before it dies and it goes into embers. And that's the moment of his greatness, that we're all going to have this time at which we peak, is his idea. Or maybe it's even within a certain aspect, or maybe it's within a certain social context or social possibility, and then we begin to decline. All of these things have different times, right? I play chess, not very well, but your peak chess age is around like, I think 21, 22, 20, something like that. So my moment of greatness flickered and I was not great. Pretty soon my like golf moment of greatness is going to flicker, right? The good thing is I run and I read, and those things you actually peak a little bit later in your life. So I have that to look forward to. But then he sees the eternal footman holding my coat and snickers. And that's kind of, I think, the first consideration or the first image he's having of death, this eternal footman. It's someone's at the door with your coat. It's time for you to go. And they're kind of laughing at you in a wry sort of way, because maybe you've overstayed your welcome, or you're, a drunk who's in denial about the fact that it's time to go. And he's afraid of this, because who wouldn't be? And then he begins to think again about whether it would have been worth it. Would it have been worth it if, after all of this time, that it comes to this question? And what if you respond, this woman, that's not what I meant at all. That's not it at all. The risk, the danger, the embarrassment of attempting to communicate some truth that's very deep to you, an emotional truth, that then is going to be met with complete, utter inability to understand. Even, he says, right, to say, I'm Lazarus come back from the dead, I should come back to tell you all, I should tell you all. Even if I'm someone, we think of the epigraph at the beginning of the poem, right, where from Dante, about no one's come back from the dead to talk about this. Even if somebody came back from the other side and tried to give us this truth with epistemological certainty, and you still couldn't understand it, and I can't speak with that sort of clarity. So there's this fear that I'm never going to be understood for the things that I say, because we all have these subjective worlds inside of our minds that cannot be adequately communicated. All language, all utterances, all speaking are translations of thoughts. Even what I'm doing right now, I'll have an idea and instantly I'm trying to channel it through, and it's not coming through all the way. And it's not just because I am a rambly sort of extemporaneous speaker. Even if I could, words can't do it. Words just translate, and they can't get that exact concept across. And that's what he's belaboring here, right? That even the miraculous would be a miscommunication, because we can't know something with any authority. We get this repeated again at "It's impossible to say just what I mean" in the next stanza. To, what if she just is sitting on the pillow and says, that's not it at all, that's not what I meant at all. But even the idea of her lounging on the pillow saying that is like, she's not really stirred up by it, she's not affected by it, she doesn't particularly care, but it means everything to him. So the dismissal of it as well, and not an attempt to say, let me try it again, let me try to say it again so that you understand, but just to go, that wasn't it, is even worse. Then he says, no, I'm not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Well, this goes back to I'm no prophet and here's no great matter. He does see himself as both. And actually, yes, you kind of are Hamlet. This whole monologue is very Hamlet-esque. You're not nobly born, right? And that's what he says right after. Well, I'm an attendant lord, right? I'm not a prince. But you are someone who's probably overeducated, who's probably kind of immature, right? Hamlet's 30 and he sounds like he's about 15 or 16 in the play. And you're somebody who is so stuck and fraught with these indecisions that you're unable to act, and you're going to miss your time. Hamlet at least gets in Act 5 to, if it is to be now, then it will not be to come. If it is to come, then it will not be now. So be it, something like that. The readiness is all. He at least gets to a point of, I don't know when the moment of my death is coming, but just merely being ready is the thing that is what's important about it, right? To live within that moment in that way, and accept one's place within the instantaneous, within the minute. And so he says a little bit later, right, I'm the fool. I'm ridiculous, at times the fool. But the truth is, he's really not even that. He's not that great, because the fool is just there for the amusement of the royals, for the amusement of the courtiers. But within Shakespeare's tradition, often the fool is the one who has the wisest things to say. They're the ones who say the thing that King Lear needs to hear. But it's not their story. So even if all of these ruminations that are within Prufrock bear some sort of wisdom or some sort of fruit that's useful, it's not really useful for his story, because he's unable to act and there's nobody to adequately communicate it to, because all of his communication is misunderstood. So then we get to this really haunting and kind of depressing ending here. He repeats, I grow old, and there's an ellipsis, I grow old, ellipsis. And that ellipsis elongates that process, because it's not a singular thing. It's something that we're all doing all of the time. Even within that line takes up longer time than it takes to say. There's pauses built into it. And then he gives images of these kind of comical, stereotypical ideas from younger people of what older people do, right? Rolling up your trousers, the bottoms of your pants, right? Walking upon the beach with your rolled up pants. Should I part my hair behind? Right. So now he's not just starting to bald. He actually has like major bald spots, and he's got that like, where do I comb it over so it doesn't look so bad? Do I dare to eat a peach? I always thought of that just because there's like, maybe he's imagining there's a certain sloppiness that like the elderly eat with. I think that's perhaps the stereotype that he's having as a younger man, that like, but again, that I'm vain about this and I don't really want anyone to see me just kind of like slobbering peaches all over. And then he says, from the image of the beach, I've heard the mermaids singing each to each. And mermaids, among other things, are these kind of fantastical creatures that are capable of magic and prophetic visions, right? But he says, I do not think that they will sing to me. Again, the impossibility of communication and connection with something else, but also the idea that he has no future, especially as this old man who's wandering the beach with his rolled up trousers, that the mermaids aren't going to speak to him because he does not live in an enchanted age. He lives in an industrial modern age, one of disenchantment, where people do not connect and where fog permeates everything. But also that he's old and he's going to die. And he's going to die soon in this image. So he sees these majestic mermaids riding on the seas. And he says in the last 3 lines, we have lingered on the chambers of the sea. By seagulls wreathed with seaweed red and brown till human voices wake us and we drown. So he imagines himself kind of in a cage or in a chamber in the sea, lulled into a sleep by these mermaid voices. But then when the human voices, the real things, come back in and speak, it snaps him out of this, and he wakes up at the bottom of the sea, unable to escape the encasement and the entrapment that is, we could take this back to the pair of claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas, right? It's silent, it's at the bottom, it's dark, grasping for something. You almost imagine a cage comes over it. And then as a person, someone calls out and he wakes up disconnected, but he can't see. And then eventually, in attempting to breathe, there's a drowning there. That's what he imagines. All of this is figurative. It's not literal, the drowning. But the present, he's caught in that suspension, and the present awareness of the human voices intervening. It creates a moment of awareness, and that moment of absolute awareness, that snapping out of it, is death, which he's fixated on and disillusioned by, but unable to accept, because he's not Prince Hamlet. Prince Hamlet can eventually accept it, and Prufrock has not gotten to that point yet. If you're still with me, you need a hobby. But you can see this is one of my hobbies, and you can see that this is a poem that I really, really love and had a lot to say about. There's more one could say about it. And perhaps some way down the line, I will say more. But I think ultimately this poem is about the speaker confronting a series of these dilemmas and a series of these questions. And perhaps that's the you and I at the beginning of the story. Let us go then, you and I. Okay, all of you crises and great questions about life. Let's roll. Let's dig it. But he doesn't come up with an answer. And he doesn't come up with anything that's satisfying. And I don't think that's a negation. I think that the poem itself, or poetry itself, is an answer in the sense that it's about attempting to create and attempting to search, even if it's just disembodied claws grasping along the floors of silent seas. I think that that's our resistance, our act of resistance, which is to live a meaningful and an examined life. And I think that that's what Eliot leaves us with in this poem. And to me, it remains as relevant now, 108 years later, as it was perhaps when it was written. So again, thank you so much. I was so just honored and privileged and glad to share this all. I hope there's some things in there that resonate with you. And I promise they'll be shorter in the future. So thank you again, and I wish you all peace.